Good morning, brothers and sisters.
Good morning.
It's nice to meet new people, right? Everyone usually sits in the same place at church, don't really get to know everyone. I have a problem, though. I don't know if anyone else has the same problem, but is your contact book in your head, like, full? It's like you're trying to add another one, and you're just like, okay, what's your name? Oh, nice to meet you, and then it's gone. Gosh. Every time. I kind of wish we'd wear, like, name tags every day as we get to know each other. Until, eventually then you don't need them anymore, but that's my problem. My title of the sermon today is I'm a Unificationist. We probably have a couple of Unificationists here, I would imagine. Maybe one or two. Raise your hand. Anyone else like? Okay, there's a couple of people. All right. This is my beautiful family. I'm married. I've been married for 14 years. Woo! I have a beautiful Korean wife. And together we've created 4 beautiful half Korean children, and half American, and quarter French. And we finally got a daughter. Thank you, God. Woo! We got our girl. Oh my God, girls are after you've had 3 boys, when that girl hits, you're just like, this is the best thing in the world. There is nothing better. Oh my God, I think having 3 boys and then a girl, they just become extra cute. Everything they do, like, I've never seen that before. That's the cutest thing in the world. Move away, boys. So she will be a spoiled princess. And that's okay. I have a little, meter at the bottom. So I'm a third through my life. Has anyone ever thought about that? So I've experienced death. I'm an orphan. Both of my parents are dead. They're no longer here on earth. And that has instilled into me a sense of time and a timeline that we all get to live on earth. If you have a little program today, you can take the paper, you can open it, and fold it to where you think you are, how much time you have left in your life. And you realize the older you get, the shorter that window becomes. And that's all we get. And I don't even know if I'm going to have the full meter. Nobody knows, right? I hope I get to live till like 100. That'd be really nice, but nobody knows. These are the most important events in my life. Being born, that was a pretty good one. That was a great one. I was born in California, 1990. I had 2 older brothers, and I was born to a really beautiful set of parents. My dad was Dr. George Detlefsen, incredibly smart person. And then my mom was a marriage and family therapist, incredibly deep person. And the 2 very different people. We seem to have a lot of people who are very different that are married together. Have you guys noticed that in this community? Seems to be something there. And I lost my dad when I was 15 years old. And I lost him to Parkinson's really when I was 10 years old. So if you know what Parkinson's is, it's a degenerative disease. So you slowly die. Your body just slowly stops working. You can no longer move. You can no longer talk. And then you pass away. Most important event in my life was his death. I got blessed in 2010. I was going to say 2014. That's the wrong date. I got blessed in 2010. And then I experienced the creation of my 3 boys, Leon, Alden, and Wynn. And then I lost my mom last year in 2023. And I'll go through all of these and kind of walk you through this, but I want you to know the most important events of my life here. And then right after my mom died, I welcomed my daughter. I think that's why I love her so much. What a beautiful thing, like, to her mom and to experience a daughter. Incredibly beautiful for me. Who's lost somebody? Any other orphans in here? Are your parents still on earth? Anyone? Or who doesn't have their parents here anymore? I'm sure some of our older, yeah, okay. Have you ever thought that you were an orphan? Has that ever crossed your mind? No. That was the weirdest thing. Well, this is about my dad, but when I lost my mom too, I felt like an orphan. It was the most interesting, ungrounding experience where you no longer have your connection here on earth anymore. This beautiful connection of your parents is gone. And you're just standing there. You're just like, what's going on? And you have to figure it out again. But going back to my dad, I lost my dad when I was 15. I was a douchebag. Like, that's the age that you go through your teenage years, and you are like a douchebag. Oh my God, I have 3 boys. What I did to my parents, if I do anything like that to, oh my God. If my kids are like me during those ages, like, I'm in big trouble. And I was in so much trouble that my mom couldn't handle me. So I got sent away to a boarding school, to Blessed Teens Academy. Anybody know BTA, Blessed Teens Academy? A few people, all right? And I got sent there, and I went kicking and screaming because I was like, oh, no, at that age, you think your whole world is high school. Like, that's like the entire world, and you get sent out. You're like, and it was the biggest blessing of my life. And it was the biggest blessing of my life because it made me reflect on my purpose, my faith, my values, and it gave me an opportunity to do one thing. And that was before my dad died. I got to see with him. I sat with him. And I decided, what's one thing that I could give my dad before he goes? And that was a decision that we're going to read the Divine Principle, just the red section, with him one last time. And in my heart, it was the idea that I wanted to let him know that even if he goes, I haven't figured it out yet, but I have a start. And so my dad's last words to me were, be all you can be. And I remember thinking, I was like, that sounds like really like military, like the Army. I think it's the slogan of the Army. But this is something I've never forgotten, like, be all you can be. What a great thing to tell your kid, before you're about to go. So the journey of, after losing my dad, I have this hole here that I've put in this image. When you lose somebody, you lose a piece of your heart. And I always reflect on this. It's the most interesting thing that you feel loss in your heart. Your heart is a muscle, but you feel it there too. It's like, it must be where I think the spirit or your soul resides, is so deep within your body right here that it just felt like there was a huge gaping hole there. So my journey of finding God was actually finding my dad. It was refusing to believe that he is just gone. So I wanted to connect with him. I still wanted him to be a part of my life. And that sent me on my entire journey to go find God, to see if this is real. So in honor of my father, I decided to A/B test my faith. And my hypothesis was that the one section I can always remember in the Divine Principle, and now I just forgot the full thing, so I won't be able to quote it. Right? We're all seeking to avoid misfortune, right? We're looking for joy. The purpose of our faith is not to suffer. The purpose of our faith is to find joy. So if I lived a principled life, would it bring me a greater amount of happiness than living an unprincipled life? Was my hypothesis. And I turned to my teachers, Father and Mother Moon, and I let them guide me. And my guiding principles, my guiding happiness principles were, again, so simple. Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. I think we overcomplicate faith. We overcomplicate spirituality. Like, oh, I need to do all these things. But at the end of the day, it's simple. And I think God intended the purpose of our lives to be so simple that my 7-year-old kid could understand it. Why would it be so complicated that you would need all of these other things to understand what is the purpose of my life? So the first lesson in these 3 things, be fruitful. Mother says, love between parents and children most resembles God's love. So I was a douchebag teenager. I very much disliked my parents. I didn't agree with them on anything. I didn't understand them. They seemed very controlling. But for me to understand and feel God's love, who did I need to work with to do that? And that was my mom. And it was building a relationship with her and her guiding me, letting her guide me in my life, that gave me an incredible sense of fulfillment and happiness individually, right? I can proudly say that my parents are my true parents. And I think that's what Father and Mother wanted for each and every one of us. Because my mom stood by my side, and yes, she would guide me. She was a therapist, so I had a therapist as a mom. So it's not like, oh, hi, honey, how are you? Here's a big hug. It's like, listen, you did great, but these 3 things of what you need to work on here. So I had a constant therapist in my life, but it was the best thing ever. And I always like to say, like, truth is reflected in reality. And so, like, okay, if the principle is true, we should see it reflected. And there's studies that even prove that children in high-quality relationships with their parents are much less likely to show signs of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and generally exhibit behaviors associated with positive social development, according to the research literature. There's literal studies that say the parent-child relationship is incredibly important and will bring about happiness in your life. And I experienced it. And then learning 2, getting blessed, starting on the multiplication piece. Who got blessed to somebody that's different than them? Right. I think everyone, no matter even if like you choose your spouse or you found your spouse on the side of the street, like they're different than you. And what is the purpose of that difference? So mother says, why then do we get married? Very simply, we marry in order to resemble God. Resemble God. Who is God, guys? Who is God? God is our heavenly parent. Who am I? I am a parent. I want my children to experience every single bit of this beautiful world in the same way that I did. God wants the same for us. So we get married to resemble God. God exists as a being of dual characteristics. Is God just a man? No. And I've learned that from my wife. Because when I was thinking one day, I was thinking, oh, God, you know how much I love my children? I love them just so much. And then the idea just realized in my head, my wife loves them just the same. And their love, their view of this world is not just my love, a man's love, It needs a woman. So in God, the dual characteristics are completely harmonized as one. When God's dual characteristics manifest in our world, they do so as man and woman. So if we want to experience God, you got to get married. And in the proper time, a man and woman are like a seed. They unite to become one. Thus, husband and wife return to God, and together we are a reflection of his original nature. Oh, what's this? Oh, okay, cool. There's studies that also say that couples that pray together stay together. That if you have a higher purpose, like my marriage isn't just for Joe and I to be happy. Our marriage centers upon God. It centers upon a higher purpose so that when there are tough times, the analogy I give everyone is that God is like a pendulum. And you can fight, which we've done before, and you can pull apart from each other, but at the end of the day, the pendulum brings you back. And without that center, you do not have that. Truth's reflected in reality. Studies say the exact same thing. Couples, in-home family devotional activities, and shared religious beliefs are positively linked with reports of relationship quality. Learning number 3. It's from the Chen Sung Gyung here. So what are children? Through our children, God educates us and let us feel how much he loves us. Through our children, we can also understand the joy God felt when he created Adam and Eve. We're experiencing the same thing God experienced. You wonder, like, oh, this mighty thing in the air is us. God wants us to experience the same joys that God had when he created this world. Through our children, we can also understand the joy God felt when he created Adam and Eve. And when our children are born, we feel love and joy, and we come to know how God felt when he created our human ancestors. Because we need to learn how to love children the way God does, we need to have children. This is the best thing in my entire life, are my kids. Funniest thing about children, and I every day I wake up and I was like, God, I miss my kids. But you can go to bed just thinking like, God, I need a break from my kids. And then you just wake up the next morning, God, I love my kids. And it's an amazing cycle that God has given us. I just had to throw another picture in my little kids. And I've told a lot of people that you need to have not just a son, if you have a daughter, you need to have a son. If you have a son, you need to have a daughter. And I say that not out of like, oh, you won't be happy if you don't, but it's like, if you want to experience what God experienced, if your goal in life is to experience all of the joys and the amazing things that God has given us, you have to experience having a daughter and a boy because they're different experiences. It's Adam and Eve. And my daughter, like, oh, God, I said it earlier, this girl is just like, she loves me too. Like, I don't think Joan can be in the back because if she sees me up here, she'll just want to come up here. Yeah, it's the best thing ever. Oh, there's an amazing study. Children don't lower happiness after all. Who would have thought? And I'll say too, I think my generation of any generation has been the most lied to generation. The most lied to, like self-obsessed generation ever. That your happiness comes first and that children, they prevent your career growth, that children, will limit you in different ways. All of my friends who've had children, especially children early, are incredibly successful. And so let's prove them wrong. My A/B test is proving that wrong. Learning number 4, the greatest happiness is generated in the family where 3 generations live together in love. This is my most profound learning in my life most recently. Like I said earlier, you go to bed, I need a break. You're exhausted from your kids. A grandparent's love is completely different. What is a grandparent's love? Like, they can just pop in, say hi, love the heck out of your children, and then say goodnight and head back home, right? Whereas I'm over here making breakfast. John's getting the kids ready for school. Like, we're stressed out. We have our work. We have all those other things we do. And they just come in and they're just there, loving the grandchildren. When I experienced this with my mom and I experienced this with John's parents, it's the purest form of love. And one thing I always like to encourage people is that if you have grandchildren, live with them. Move, even, and go live with them. And I say that from a place where, again, you talk about the meter of life. We only have a certain amount of time. Children also have a meter, which is the amount of time they can soak in that love, this absolute pure love. When they're teenagers, I don't think grandma coming over and gives hugs and kisses is going to be as, incredible. But when they're young and they can soak it all in, that's the time you need to be there. I treat, have you ever thought about love and the number of kids you have as an exponential number? So you can think of it in relationships, right? You have, me and my wife, right? I have a relationship with her. She has a relationship with me. It's 1 squared. And then you have kids. Each kid will now have a relationship with you. And each kid will now have a relationship with your wife. You have another child. Now that child will have a relationship with your son. You have a relationship with that. You're building this network of relationships. And each one you add is an exponential network. And it's an exponential network of love. So the more kids you have, the more you're able to build a bigger network of love. And there's some people that have done a really good job at this that I wish I could have that many kids. 4 kids is a lot. But then you add grandparents to the mix. So what are you adding? You're adding exponential amount of love for your children to experience. Does having more love, is it going to make you a better person? I honestly believe so. I believe that seeing your grandparents tremendously being there to support their grandchildren is the greatest love that you can have, not only for your grandchildren, but for your children. If your children were somehow hurt by you not paying attention to them, or they saw your priorities elsewhere, and then they have kids, and you come and love those kids, let me tell you that the biggest thing that I miss about my mom is not her love for me. It's her love for my kids. That's the biggest thing. Oh, okay, look, truth is reflected in reality too. increases psychological, social, financial capital factors associated with improvements in health and longevity. So it's, it's not even just like my feeling or about. There's studies that say this is better for everyone. This is a picture that we took at, what's this? The Salton Sea. Anyone been in the Salton Sea? Yeah, it's a pretty incredible place. It's a completely saltwater sea, lake, I guess, in Southern California. And I took this picture because earlier that day, I wanted to remember this, was that my mom, she had open heart surgery. She had it almost 2 years ago. And she had an, what is it called then? I forgot the technical term of what happened. But anyway, she had to be rushed. She almost died, and she had to be rushed in for open heart surgery, and she survived. And she survived barely. There's a 50% chance that you make it in the hospital after she had that, and then there's a 50% chance you survive the surgery, and then you still have to recover. And then 9 months later, the doctor said that they have to do open heart surgery again on her. So she's barely hanging on there, and they're like, sorry, we have to do this again. And this was the day my mom told me that she's going to have surgery again. And earlier that day, we were in Joshua Tree, and I kind of decided, I just need to call my mom. And I need to tell her something. And I called her and I told her that, Mom, I want to let you know that I'm going to continue on the traditions of our faith in our family. And I just needed to tell her that. I needed her to know that that was going to be what I'm going to do in my life. And I'll get into why that's important later, but I wanted her to at least know that no matter what, all of these visions and values that she had for her goals in her life would be continued through me and my family. And the reason for this is, there's a quote here which is, filial devotion is preeminent practical virtue as well as an eternal pillar of life. We must practice filial devotion while our parents are alive. After they are gone, no matter how much we want to sacrifice for them, it will be too late. We must know how precious this moment is and be proud of it. Time. This is a picture of Alden, my second son, with my mom in the hospital. And that's her love invested into him and him giving it back to her in this picture. But I wanted to tell her that because all of these things that maybe they're unsaid with your parents, this part of hate or anger or whatever you have towards your parents, if you don't resolve that now when your parents are alive, you will never get that opportunity to do so again. You can in spiritual world, but it's very difficult too. And resentment to me is a blocker to happiness. If our goal in life is to experience this greatest, most beautiful level of happiness and you're resentful, you are limiting yourself and your ability to love and to forgive and to experience this beautiful life as you want it. The last words my mom said to me, and she wrote this down before she left, was to teach Leon about death. It's an interesting thing to say, but this is a sermon that I gave in Seattle, was that the final gift, we're supposed to live in 3 generations. We're supposed to love our grandparents. Our grandparents represent God. They represent this purest form of unconditional love for their grandchildren. And when they die, that is the final gift that they give their grandchild. And that is that the grandchild wants to go find them. See, I learned that lesson from my dad, but you're not supposed to learn the lesson from your parents. In the ideal world, you're really not. You're supposed to learn that lesson from your grandparents. But if your grandparents were never there, if they just came, you saw them on Thanksgiving, hey, grandma, grandpa, you're not going to learn the lesson. My grandparents died, and I barely knew them. And I wish I did. I wish I knew more. And then my mom's side, they both died before I even was born. So I wasn't raised with grandparents, but my kids were. And so the last thing my mom wrote, even before this, she said it was time to go. She was in the ICU for 40 days. They couldn't recover her no matter what they did. So she said, just time to go. Please let me go. as fast as possible is what she said. And then she wrote this. At first we were pushing back on her. We're like, no, Mom, maybe there's a way or whatever. And then she wrote this, and I knew. That was it. And if you listen to Leon pray, so we do like a little family closing every night in my family. And all of Leon's prayers are about Grandma. He prays that Grandma has a good time in spirit world with Grandpa, and that all of our friends and relatives. He goes on and on about that, and he prays for other things too, but his core focus is on Grandma. How can you understand the spirit world unless you know somebody who's there? You need this connection. So death, in a way, it's hard and there's difficulty, but it's the most beautiful gift because it gives you a connection into this other world. Like I talked about earlier, after my mom died, I went into this I'm an orphan, and it was the most interesting thing. And the hole in my heart this time from losing my mom was losing her love for my children. And I remember I was just walking, man, death makes you pray. Have you guys ever experienced that where somebody died and you just start praying? You start talking to yourself, you do whatever it is, and you want to go find them. And I was praying in our neighborhood, and my mom told me this. She said, take responsibility for the love. So her love, in the physical world was gone. And she said, take responsibility for that love for your children. So, and I took that as meaning be a better husband, be a better father, be more loving, be more unconditional to my children. The love that she taught me by giving it to my children. The last thing on death, too, which is the most interesting piece, is that, during all of those hours of prayer after her passing, the simplest way I can describe connecting with my mom is like a frequency. If you think about what we are, our lives and our spirit, we're all energy, right? That's just all we are. Albert Einstein has many wonderful quotes about us being energy. Energy never dies, it just transforms. That's all it is. And so in the simplest of form, I really want to understand, what is the spirit? What does the spirit mean? And it's energy. And it's, there's even theories, there's quantum theories about energy or spirits being waves and consciousness being a quantum wave. And one day, I found my mom's frequency. It was the most interesting thing. Can I get tissue up here? Sorry. It was the most interesting thing, and I tuned into it, and I could almost hear her. You don't hear them, but you feel and you hear them. And so, coming back to the start of this, thank you. Why am I a unificationist? Everything that my parents taught me that my life could be has become. They taught me the most important parts of my life, being fruitful, right? To be someone who is, I'm not perfect in no ways, but I'm at peace with myself. I don't hold resentment towards anyone. I have no resentment towards my parents. I'm at peace with myself, and I can say, I love who God made me to be. Multiplying, having a ton of children. 4 is not that many. People have more. But each child has been an incredible experience of love and just amazement in what we are meant to do. And then having dominion, which I see as adding value to the world. And we have a business and we do that, and it's incredibly rewarding. My parents didn't lie to me. So who are Father and Mother Moon to me? My teachers. We view God as our heavenly parent, right? So God created this world. God created each and every one of us. And we could choose to believe that, or we could choose not to believe that. We could choose to just a rock and floating in space, but that's no fun. I choose to believe that we're something more. In the simplest of terms, I see true parents, Father, Mother, Moon, as people who decided to take responsibility. Who here is taking responsibility for more than just yourself, your own life, your own family? Who stands up and says, I'm going to take responsibility for the entire world? Right? Not just Koreans, not just Americans, but for the entire world. Not just Christians, but Muslims, Jews, Hindus, everyone. Not treating them as they're different or they don't know, but they're still all God's children. That's the people that I see them as. Regardless of all the dogma, if you just take the dogma out, and I as a parent and my children come to you and say, Dad, I want to take responsibility for our family. No, son, you can't do that. You're not the chosen one. Sorry. Would I say no to that? Would I reject that? Regardless of the dogma, anyone who comes and says, I want to take responsibility and then does it, how can you reject that? How could God as a heavenly parent reject that? So I always tell people, how do you describe our faith? We are the take responsibility faith. If you need love, go be a Christian for a while. That's okay, Experience the love and joy and grace that Jesus has for you and fill yourself up with love. And when you're ready to take responsibility, come over. Come, let's go take responsibility. Take responsibility is not always easy, though. So this is some survival tips that I've found over the years. The first one is that it's so important to separate your faith from church as the corporation. Church is a corporation. It is all of us imperfect people doing our best to bring everyone together. But my faith is not in church, the corporation. My faith is in God and my experience with true parents. The second one is you got to take the kimchi jjigae out of the tteokguk kyohei. You got to understand a lot of what we do as a unificationist is not unificationism. It's just actually Koreans. And I've learned that from my wife. My wife has taught me that lesson very clearly. And that's not to say anything's bad about that, but it's to understand that God's way is each and every one of ours way. It's not just necessarily one way. And then it's to step back and realize, what are we in the point in time in human history? Like we may say Christian churches have much better support groups for divorces or much better support groups for having children or better Sunday school or whatever it is. Christian churches have been around for 2,000 years. They got a little bit of a head start. We're in version 1. We're this little tree sapling over here that we're still growing, right? We've borne like one fruit. We're in the second or third generation now, so we're getting there. But it's to realize that we are babies in the structure of what we believe in. And it's also to recognize what incredible things have happened in the last 100 years. Father Moon was born 1920. We're 105 years from that now. Look what happened. Women got the right to vote. A black woman could marry a white man. Martin Luther King fought for civil rights. Communism was defeated. Right? There's a lot of amazing things that have happened in the last 100 years. I also like to think that we're a leading cause of interracial marriages, too. I think that, we set the example for that one, too, which is pretty amazing. To believe that in 1982, a small number, I think less than 10% on this chart of people were getting interracially married, and now we're at close to 18, 20%. Look at this chart. We live in the most peaceful time in human history. And if you look over the last 100 years, where are we now? We are in literally the most peaceful time in human history. Truth is reflected in reality. So if true parents came to raise the consciousness of this world, regardless if they had a direct impact or an indirect impact, I believe they did. I believe they did something. Something has happened in the last 100 years that's significant. We're also about to be like an interplanetary species, so it's a good time we get this right before we send people out to Mars or whatever. But there's still conflict today. The last lesson, and one of the strongest reasons that I'm a unificationist, is I believe in the power of the blessing. How do you solve this? How do you solve Palestinians hating Israelis and Israelis hating Palestinians? How do you solve that? You think a politician's going to come solve it? He's going to call, I know how to solve this. We need a new law. No, brothers and sisters. Who here is half Korean, half Japanese? Anyone? All right, please stand up. Can you stand up for a second? If you're half Korean and half Japanese. Give these people a round of applause. Do you understand what they did? Their parents did. Koreans and Japanese and Koreans didn't like each other for a long time. If you look at what the relationship is now, it's a completely different place than it was 100 years ago. So how do you solve this conflict? There are soldiers here who are willing to die for their country. They will take a bullet from a Palestinian and die. How many of them are willing to marry for their country? To marry the other side and say, I want to make peace with you, and I'm willing to suffer and to battle my marriage for that sake. That's what our parents did. Imagine volunteering. You just raise your hand. I'm willing to do that. There is no solving this conflict outside of the blessing. It's our world's most beautiful tool. So I asked the Japanese and Koreans to stand up, but this is from Mother's autobiography. I'll read it. The Unification movement teaches that intercultural, interracial families are the key to world peace. The key. During my husband's life, most of our members requested that he and I arrange their marriage for this purpose of making a complete offering of their lives to God. We, second generations, are the fruit of that offering. Yes, we didn't have the greatest, most adorably loving parents to each other, but what were they doing? They were fighting for peace. And some did have adorable, loving relationships too. They figured it out. But in many cases, if not most, they knew that this meant they would be dedicating to their life to someone that is quite different from them, who might not speak their language or know their culture. They wanted their marriage to be grounded in nothing but God, true parents, and the principles of peace. Our brides and bridegrooms requested this path with gratitude, but their parents sometimes desperately opposed it. It was the parents of thousands of Korean Japanese couples that faced the greatest difficulty. One Korean father represented many when he wrote to my husband, "When I think about what we suffered under Japanese colonial rule, my blood still boils. I think that my son will marry the daughter of our enemy nation, and I will never accept a Japanese daughter-in-law into our family." Never. Many parents of the Japanese brides felt the same from their side of the divide. So our half Japanese, half Korean brothers, did your grandparents accept you? Did your Japanese grandparents accept you? Did your Korean grandparents accept you? Literally, the key to world peace is sacrificing your life for something. Jesus said, love your enemy. Most people admit that a peaceful world will only come when we love our enemies. Nonetheless, it is not easy for most of us to translate Jesus' words into action. We live in the most peaceful time in history because of what our parents did. If we have no enemy nation, we don't need to marry an enemy nation. Culturally, it's still very different. Koreans and Americans, very different people. But you don't need to marry an enemy. So some brides and grooms bit their lips as they took part of this joint wedding, 246 ceremonies, and their coast was no means smooth as they prepared their marriage and spent the first years of their lives together. But their commitment to live for a purpose beyond themselves, centered on God, the pendulum, keeping it centered on God, gave them the strength necessary to liquidate the underlying terrible history of their two nations that had been enemies. They were able to dissolve this bitter root through coming to understand each other and healing each other's pain. So the last thing I want to add is, it all comes back to how do we solve the problems of this world? It comes back to us. For us to take responsibility of our faith, for us to take responsibility of our family, of our relationships, for our parents to take responsibility as grandparents and love the heck out of your grandchildren. Spoil the heck out of them because you represent the most purest form of God's love, and our kids need it. And at the end of the day, true parents don't want to be the only true parents. Who would want that? They want us to become true parents for our own families. Mother says, a husband and wife who believe in the sanctity of love and fulfill their responsibility accordingly are practicing true love. Through their love, God creates a nest of happiness, and true love makes us true husbands and wives who, after giving birth to sons and daughters, grow to become true parents. So let's take responsibility. Not you. Thank you, everybody.